Today I will be talking about three different social and political movements that occurred during the 1960s and 1970s. These three movements would be the anti-war movement, which was opposing the Vietnam War, the feminist movement, and the LGBTQ movement. All three movements seem to be independent from each other, but are very much intertwined, the people participating in one movement also participating in the other movements. As we see in the picture here, these movements were concerned about giving power back to people who were seen as powerless at the time. So the first movement, the anti-war movement, it was began in the early 1960s as a result of opposition to the Vietnam War. It started among college students in campuses countrywide, and it soon after became a huge political protest. But first, in order to understand why the Vietnam War caused such an uproar among the American public, we need some background information. So, the Vietnam War was basically seen as like a civil war in between two groups in Vietnam that many people saw that the US had no right to be involved in such a civil war. And in order to get the troops for the Vietnam War, they were recruiting on college campuses, which is why the movement started on college among college students because they were opposed to the draft and they didn't want to be fighting in a war. They wanted to get their education and live their lives. So, as a result, many students formed organizations, associations that were meant to try and stop U.S. involvement in Vietnam and also to stop the draft. Also, college campuses provided activities such as teach ins, where they would invite people to come and talk to students about how the Vietnam War was working, what was going on overseas, and to answer any questions that they had about the war in general. Despite students were still staging sit-ins and protests in order to achieve their main goal to stop the draft in college campuses and to raise awareness to get the troops out of Vietnam. So the movement soon spread from college campuses to everywhere. Vietnam veterans were coming home and opposing the war because they had been there, they weren't agreeing with what they were involved in, what had happened over there, and it soon spread to be a huge movement across all of the United States. Along with these college students and these Vietnam War veterans, musicians such as the band Buffalo Springfield used their talents and their influence over large amounts of people in order to voice their opinions about the opposition of the Vietnam War. And even though all these tactics, the protests, the stand ins, the teach ins, even musicians trying to spread awareness, didn't really help to stop the war, but it did help the American public get into an age where they become more aware of what is happening in their foreign policies and their war overseas and such. The next big social slash political movement of this era is the feminist movement, which is divided into two main groups of people. The first are professional women, such as Betty Friedan, who's depicted here. They wanted equal pay and equal rights in employment. The next being political activists who wanted things such as abortion laws and rights, privacy rights for women. In order to help these women achieve what they wanted to achieve, organizations such as NOW, the National Organizations for Women, were set up. NOW helped in employment equality, which was getting equal education, maternity leave, pay, stuff like that. Moving on to the tactics of how women came to achieve these rights. Among political activists, they favored protests, such as the protest at the Miss America pageant in 1968. They were burning their bras, they were holding up signs which depicted women as cattle, and they wanted the judges to judge the people and not as if they were livestock. Another major stride towards equality for women was the Equal Rights Amendment, where women were hoping to get equal rights under law, under constitutional law. This unfortunately was unsuccessful due to the group Stop ERA. But despite the major failure in the Equal Rights Amendment, the feminist movement saw great success in the passing of Title IX, giving equality to women in higher education. Another major success for the feminist movement was the court case Roe v. Wade, in which abortion became legal nationwide. Like the anti war movement, the feminist movement did a lot to raise awareness among the American public about issues that they didn't know were so big at the time. But unlike the anti war movement, the feminist movement did a lot more in achieving the set goals that they had, such as the abortion laws and equal employment acts. The final movement of this era is the LGBTQ movement. This came around in the late 60s to early 70s because the LGBTQ community became bigger due to an anonymity in cities, separation from families, they weren't so close anymore, and industrialization, which gave lesbians and gay women their freedom. Before the Stonewall Inn riots, the gay community didn't really have a problem with how things were going. But after people saw the brutality of police against gay people, the movement started to gain momentum. A major goal of this movement was to get the APA to remove homosexuality from the list of mental disorders. The next goal was to stop discrimination in housing and employment against homosexuals. And the third and final goal would be reform in law, such as reform in crimes against nature, prohibiting homosexuality by law, and equal rights for gay marriage. A major way in which the LGBTQ movement was able to achieve some of these goals was through the homophile movement. The homophile movement were people who were not necessarily gay, but who fought for the rights of those who were homosexuals. The major success of this movement was that the APA did remove the homosexuality from the list of mental disorders, giving homosexuals an instant cure, as so said in the previous picture. Another major achievement was that crimes against nature laws in 26 states were reformed by 1987. But a major flaw in this movement was that they didn't get equal rights in marriage, and not all states reformed their crimes against nature laws until very much later. So, of the three movements, which was the most successful? In my opinion, the most successful movement would be the feminist movement. This is because they were the most successful at achieving their goals, and unlike the anti-war movement or the LGBTQ movement, in which only some of the goals were achieved.